this is Madalyn
and Suze Cooper, and you're listening to All Things Audio.
How exciting to find out, because I guess was just oblivious and not paying attention to it, but the Twitter Spaces tab turned 2 years old. Was this news to you, Suze? Because I didn't even realize it had been around for 2 years.
I think various guises of it have been around for 2 years, haven't they? But it came, it went, it came back. It was cards, it was the audio tab. Some people had one version, other people had another version. So, yeah, I mean, it sort of feels like, really? That was 2 years ago? Was it that long ago? But I guess it was. I mean, Elon's been in charge for quite some time now, and not a lot happened other than the Spaces tab disappearing after that. So I guess we probably had it about a year before then. And yeah, I mean, it was a big deal when it happened, wasn't it?
It was, because that's always been just one of our biggest issues with Spaces is the lack of discoverability. And it was nice when they had come out with a tab, but it's gone through so many iterations, right? Do you remember how it used to look? There actually is a screenshot in the nest here from Sajad where showing what it looked like back then versus what it looks like now. But even in the beginning, I remember they changed it multiple times. And then you may recall there was a time where many of us had different versions of it. I had like the most current version, but then you had one that was maybe the one before that. And then somebody else would say, well, mine doesn't look like either of yours. And it was an even older version. So it's gone through a lot.
Yeah, I mean, even now, I'm not sure that mine still looks like those big purple cards. I don't think I've ever seen the smaller squares with the circle profile pictures inside them. I don't think I've ever had that version. I've just got really massive cards, the big purple things.
I think the small one was one of the early versions, because it didn't have much information. That's what I remember it, because when they went to the bigger, I mean, I kind of liked when it was smaller like that, but it just didn't have a whole lot of info. Whereas the bigger one, you could read the whole title, you could see the topics, the names of the topics. You just had more, information on who was hosting it.
There's kind of pros and cons in them both. Either you can see an awful lot more of them on your mobile screen to see what's coming up and what's happening. There was also that kind of instant notification bell button that you could hit. Or you can have the other version, which is the bigger card, which means you see less of them or fewer of them on the screen, but you do get more information about what that space might be about, who's talking in it, how many people there are, and all those kind of things.
And being that I actually spend more time on desktop than I do on mobile, I love the newer feature where we can see live spaces on the sidebar on a browser. And that's actually how I'm discovering a variety of spaces that normally I'm not, because I'm not on mobile enough. So, I'm not on mobile, which means I'm not seeing them in the spaces bar at the top. I'm not tapping on the tab when I am on mobile. So either I am going to spacesdashboard.com with an intention and I'm finding stuff that way, or I'm just doing my thing on desktop and then I see, these top 3 listen live now in Spaces. And I'm like, oh, this sounds interesting. And somebody I know is talking, or somebody I know is hosting, or one of them says somebody I know is listening. So that has gotten me into more Spaces since that feature started on desktop.
Yeah, I like seeing it on the desktop too. I think it's a great place for it. It's, right in the space where I'm looking at what's going on generally on the platform, and it tends to suggest spaces that I might actually be interested in as well, which, is a new thing, because while discoverability is something we've always discussed, even when they've worked on discoverability, it's not always thrown up things that we're particularly interested in. Whereas I do find that the desktop version does seem to be working. So it's a neat little box that's actually useful.
Absolutely. So did you know Spaces, the username Twitter Spaces handle, actually did their first tweet since October 2022?
Yeah, it's quite a moment, really. I mean, considering how busy that handle used to be.
Yeah, they were giving everybody a heads up on June 2nd that, hey, we're going to do some maintenance on the infrastructure to handle bigger spaces. Now, I was not surprised to see this tweet come through, because we know that there've been a lot of issues with these larger spaces. They had, this big, we talked about it last week here in All Things Audio, the big announcement when Governor Ron DeSantis was announcing that he was running for president, and they had some major issues with that Spaces. So they were trying to get things in order for the next big one.
Yeah, and I mean, we did say if they were thinking of doing bigger spaces, considering how glitchy that space had been, it would be a good idea to kind of put everything in place and make it a bit more stable, so that it doesn't end up falling off a cliff and needing to regather millions of people back into an online space. So, yeah, it's not a surprise. It's nice to see the Twitter Spaces handle have someone behind it again. And it's also nice to see that, there's some tech stuff going on with Spaces to improve it and maintain it. Yeah, I mean, it clearly the maintenance and improvement is on Elon's terms. He clearly wants these bigger spaces. He's, there's a very political vibe over here at the moment because of these bigger spaces. And I guess it's worth them working on spaces so that they can do that. But it does definitely feel like, Elon wants to play this political game with it all. So let's make sure it all works for that reason.
Yeah, because he had done a tweet replying to the @TwitterSpaces handle saying that the system is being upgraded and stress tested in advance of Robert Kennedy Jr.'s interview. That was this past Monday on June 5th. And I was thinking, okay, they're giving themselves several days to get ready, so it's probably going to work. So I wasn't able to attend it live, but I just had this feeling like, okay, they're getting their act together. It's going to actually work and not have issues. But then when I go to it later, it looked like it didn't work. And I put a tweet in the nest from Elon, and when you actually click on it, it says canceled. So I guess they had issues. Were you there? Did you try going live, or did you hear much about it?
I didn't, but I was obviously aware that it was going to happen and was looking out for the card so that I could copy it across into the All Things Audio Notion page so that we could use it in the nest today. And actually, to me, I was more interested in that cancelled card than I was the space and the topic of it. And the fact that I haven't seen a card like that for quite some time, and the fact that it was just kind of sat there with that kind of cancelled line on it. And I do think, I did see, I think it might have been Morgan tweeted out after the event that you could still set a reminder for it. So I think even with all of their, all hands to the pump, let's get this thing maintained and able to hold this bigger space, there's obviously still some patchy areas there that didn't quite work as they expected. And to see a sort of cancelled card was I thought that was quite interesting, but then I am a complete geek.
Well, they did finally get it working, and as of today, 2.4 million have tuned in. Now, when it was live, those that tuned in live for this, I believe it was a 2-hour long conversation, was 500,000. But what's so interesting is, why did they host this space to coincide when the big Apple Developers Conference was going on? And that's all people were talking about on Monday, June 5th. That was the big news. Like, all you had to be was in the Twitter feed to just see people talking about all the new gadgets, all the new stuff that was announced.
Yeah, and the thing is that, Twitter is generally where people go for WWDC. And surely Elon knows that. Like, people live tweet it, the hashtag is on fire, it trends every year. Like, it's a big event. And it's been a big event for Twitter as well, because people do come over here to chat about what's being launched, what's being discussed over there. And so it is a really interesting time, and absolutely not a coincidence, I would suggest, that happened at the same time. You've got lots of people that will have come to the platform for the Apple event, I would suggest. So it's busy anyway. And then to put on something like this, when he knows he's drawing the crowd, as you've just said, millions of people tuning in, even if that's like the replay and everything else, there just seems to be this real undercurrent at the moment. These political spaces really are drawing people in. It's very, very interesting to watch.
It really is. And then you had shared with me that Giuliani had done both a video and Spaces. I guess they did a combination. So you got a live stream and Spaces for part of, I guess, the podcast he has. So that had happened this week. So we're definitely seeing a lot more politics coming into the Spaces arena. And I imagine we're just going to see more and more of that as we get closer to the next big election here in the U.S.
Yeah, I imagine so. I mean, I think this is someone who's decided to put what is a regular live stream show and to leverage Spaces while doing that. So it's kind of extending the platform, I guess, which we haven't seen an awful lot of. So that, again, that is where my interest lies, not necessarily in the actual subject of it, but the fact that someone's thinking about expanding content that they're already creating and perhaps using Spaces to do that. I'm interested in the fact this tweet says that they're live video and Spaces right here on Twitter. I'm assuming that's Spaces here on Twitter and not video as well, because obviously in recent weeks we've discussed whether or not video is going to get much more of a platform here on Twitter than Spaces. But all of this, as I say, it's extremely interesting to watch and a little bit unnerving, if I'm honest. So yeah, we'll see over the next few weeks where it all goes.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. But so far, I'm just seeing one side of the political spectrum being all in on Spaces and this upgrade to the live streaming through Twitter. So I'd like to see it more even. So time will tell. We'll see how this all starts playing out. I'm sure we'll be reporting on it more and more as we just start seeing more people jumping into this. But let's get away from politics. Let's talk about Spotify. I cannot believe they're laying off employees. It was kind of surprising to me with their podcast division. I really thought they were really moving up in the podcast area over at Spotify.
Yeah, I mean, we heard about layoffs last year. I think it was sort of October time. There were some staffing cuts at Spotify, and now they're saying that they're cutting 2% of the worldwide workforce, which is around 200 employees from the podcast division. So that was announced on Monday. The other part of this news is that Gimlet and Parcast, who are both audio operations that were bought by Spotify, they're actually going to merge those. And that's going to be the renewed Spotify Studios section of the company. And that will essentially produce all these original podcasts that we hear of from Spotify. Again, we heard about them cancelling shows quite recently. There are various exclusive deals that haven't been renewed. There are shows that have been cut. And now we're hearing that they're going to push Gimlet and Parcast together, and they're going to be this whole new kind of section for such podcasts. So I don't know. It feels like they're trying to get their ducks in a row. It would have been nice if they'd already done that.
Right. That's what I thought. I thought they were done with all of that. That's why I was just so surprised. It's like, didn't they already do a round of layoffs? Didn't they already cut shows? What now?
I mean, I think Spotify has always been a tricky one. It's a music streaming platform, and they kind of came in on podcasting because they've got people's ears, quite literally. And, they're very good at kind of getting the insights and the data from the listeners. They know the genres people are listening to. They know how long they're listening for. They know what tracks they go for. They can see the play, all that kind of thing. All the data they've got on people is amazing. And so when you kind of plug podcasting into that, that's fantastic. But there does seem to be this kind of silo between podcasting and music, and podcasts aren't music. And it just feels a little bit like they kind of went, hey, we're audio. Let's buy up all these great companies and we'll just put it all in this big Spotify pot and we'll stir it around. Oh, yeah, let's do some Spotify Live as well. Oh, yeah, we'll buy Green Room and we'll make that into a thing because it's all audio and it's all great. And actually, now it feels like someone sat there and almost sat back and gone, oh, hang on a minute. What have we actually got here? What are we doing? It really feels like that. And unfortunately, you're hearing about them cutting 200 people's jobs in the podcast division. And starts to make you think, well, actually, where does that leave Spotify and podcasting? So yeah, again, another interesting one to watch. I wonder if we're going to see a lot more behind these exclusive shows from this new Spotify Studios organization. And I mean, the indies, we put our podcasts onto Spotify. I can't imagine they're going to prevent us or stop us from doing that at any point, really. I think, that's not really the issue, but it's just the fact that they just don't seem to be very forthcoming in understanding the podcast industry and what there is there for them and how they can fit into that. I mean, at the podcast show last year, 2022, Spotify and Amazon literally owned the entrance. You had Amazon, you walked in, Amazon was massive on the right on a pumped up stage. It was huge. Spotify on your left, they had all kinds of tech. You could print out a bag with your podcast icon show graphic on the front, and you could go and speak to all the people, and it was all there in your face. This year, we literally stood in the middle and we were like, where's Spotify? I'd actually planned to meet someone by the Spotify stand and then got there and went, I literally can't see them. And I realised they were actually upstairs in a corner, and they were a private invite only stand. They were not a public stand. So while I'm sat here saying, I can't see them cutting off the indies, actually, they really did at the podcast show. They were not interested in talking to us. What they wanted was to wine and dine their exclusives, meet with people that they needed to meet with. And they were doing that behind closed doors without any fanfare. There were no freebies. There were no nothing. It was very much behind closed doors. So I think Spotify is definitely having a reassessment of what they're doing with podcasting. And I have no idea where that might end up.
That is some great insights. Thank you for sharing that. I had no idea. But then again, I remind myself this is the same company that could have crushed it with social audio. They had their chance. Exactly.
That's what I mean. I just feel like they went, all these lovely little audio companies that are all doing their own thing. We want a piece of that pie. But they never actually thought about how that all comes together, either in business terms for them as Spotify, or in terms of users. Like how do you get the user interested in the things that you've then got access to, whether that's social audio and live streaming or podcasting or music? They're very different ways of listening. And yes, I love their drive playlists that get put together by AI, and I can hear a little bit of a podcast and then a track from my playlist or whatever, and it puts that together for me. I quite like that. But at the same time, I don't know that going all guns blazing into these things without understanding the audiences for each, without understanding, podcasting as a whole has really done them an awful lot of good. And I say that literally by looking at them and going, I just don't think you get it.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how everything has changed so much in the whole podcast world. It just seems like everything is geared towards the big players coming in, taking over because you have this article we're going to talk about next of, some new show that actually came from a Clubhouse show that is now being put out through iHeartMedia. So it's interesting how all these big things, but then you got the indies. It reminds me so much of the music business, which I was a part of for a very long time, where you got the major labels and the indie labels. And when you describe Spotify at the conference this year and how they were just really just whining and dining the top names and kind of, I've seen that in the music business, same kind of thing with the record labels and some of these big corporate things that are they're not there to schmooze with everybody. They're just there, to go be with all the big stars.
Yeah, and I think that's a great comparison, to be honest. Major labels and independent producers, all of that kind of thing. It's you can see it yourself when you open your podcast app. How often do you see those top 10 on any of the different genres that you might click into change? And how often are probably 90% of those, so 9 out of those 10s, have probably got a celebrity face on the front? And, that's not really where podcasting started. Yes, there's big business involved in this, but there's also millions of, stories and people that want to create audio content and people that aren't, millionaires and celebrities and already thought leaders in various places. Podcasting opens up the ground for people to be able to tell their stories and become these thought leaders. But we're kind of stuck behind this barrier at the moment of those that have got the money to be the ones out there saying the stuff. And, it's a very awkward industry at the moment. And the podcast show didn't get it right this year again, really. It's still the big boys. And then, let's do a couple of things to appease the creators, as we were called over here. And that'll be okay. But really, it's all the big names. It's the big celebs. It's, it's two different worlds, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, it really is. And so tell me about this. You have a really interesting story. I just put it in the nest. We'll have it in the show notes for our podcast listeners. I'm not familiar with this couple and their podcast, but I'm fascinated that it started off as something they did in Clubhouse in 2020. And then I guess it got them a lot of attention. And now iHeartMedia has nabbed them to do this as a podcast on their platform.
Yeah, that's right. So I've not actually heard of this happening before. This is the Arti and Sriram show. So this is a husband and wife duo. They started having conversations with big people, big names in tech and media over on Clubhouse in 2020. And they've continued doing that to the point that they have drawn attention from drawn the attention of iHeartMedia, and they've actually got a distribution deal now with them. So after kind of 2 years of doing the live show, it's now an edited podcast, and it's being pushed out. I just think it is that story that everybody spoke about when these platforms started up. If you're consistent, if you keep going with this, who knows where it might take you. And it's great that this couple have been recognised and have kind of gone on to create more content from something that just started, I would imagine, as a lockdown thing to do on Clubhouse, this new social audio app. So yeah, really interesting to see that that's happened.
It's a great success story, and it is really cool to hear that they got that kind of attention. There are a lot of business podcasts I listen to. I love Pat Flynn, Amy Porterfield, those types. And it's interesting now these were indie podcasters. They were all very early adopters. But now when you listen to them, they always throw in there somewhere that they're part of this, I guess, HubSpot platform or something with HubSpot, which I guess they've decided to get into the podcast business to, kind of scoop up all of these well-known business podcasters. So it just seems like it's just the big guys and the little guys. But that should never deter anybody from starting a podcast. It's still such a great way to connect with people and to build your audience. When I think back to when I started podcasting 10 years ago, I've done all different types of digital marketing since 1996. And I think podcasting is one of the best ones you can do to get your brand and your message out there.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget these are people that they've got like a background in tech. They've got fantastic connections, and they drew people like Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk over onto Clubhouse, onto this new app to have a conversation. So it's not like they were just talking amongst themselves. Again, it's people they've got the big names, and they've used those to their advantage. But it's interesting just to see that they've kept going, and that the show's been noticed and picked up. So yeah, a success story from social audio, I would suggest.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting what they're doing. I am really thrilled about our next item, this platform that I never even heard of before that you are bringing to our attention today, called Blast.
So Blast is an amazing new platform, basically, that is available, that is audio-based. It's calling itself a social media audio-based platform, which in my head is a social audio platform. It's leaning more into music at the moment. So people are streaming music over there, although it does say in this information that some people are doing some sort of exciting audio experiments with it, and perhaps even doing podcasts with it. The content that you put on there lasts for 24 hours and then disappears. There is a very, very simple UI. There's no commenting. It is all very much, press the button and you can listen to whatever's live on there at the time. This has got 20 streams going all at once. So essentially, they're calling this a kind of radio station, a bit like Amazon Amp. So Amazon Amp, you've got like 24 different streams that you can tap into at any one time, a bit like 24 radio stations being available to you. Blast has 20 that are available. I mean, they're a startup from Brooklyn. They've got 7 people working for them at the moment. And it's a really fantastic idea, I think. The other thing that is really interesting about it, Madalyn, that really caught my attention is that there's no ads, it's free to listen, and there's no subscriptions. But in order to broadcast, you have to buy a piece of hardware or software from Blast. So they're offering things like a plugin for the digital audio software to be able to broadcast. They have got an interface which they've called a Blast box with inputs and a headphone jack. And there's even a microphone as well, the Blast mic, which this article talks about, that you can buy from them. So basically you buy one of these bits of equipment that allows you to have the setup to broadcast, and then you get the opportunity to do just that on this Blast social audio platform. So super interesting. I mean, when we were, trying to set up iRigs and sorting out mix minus feeds and all kind of things just to get our, XLR microphones running through Twitter. What would we have done for a microphone and an interface that we could just plug in and knew that it would work on the platform? I think I'd have done just about anything at that point. So it's an interesting way of coming at it. It's exciting, as you say.
Yeah, it is very different. When I was first reading the article, and it first started talking about, while it's free for the listeners, if you want to broadcast, you have to buy gear, like talking about a plug-in and this blast box and the microphone. And I'm like, well, who's going to do that? But as I kept reading, it was fascinating. And that this is, I guess, built by people who understand audio. So it's like super high quality. If you do want to broadcast it, that this is, stereo microphone that's really just built to do the streaming, to make it super easy. It goes right to your Wi-Fi. You just hit a button and you're now live on the air. What I thought that was really cool is that they're just saying that this is such a simple app that you're able to stream, you can listen, you can subscribe to your favorites and even hit a like button, but there's no comment section. There's no messaging. You can tip somebody. So like a cash tip, which I thought was cool. But it's not that typical social media and having everything run by an algorithm, which I think many of us are just so tired of. So I find this to be quite interesting. I'm definitely going to keep looking into this more because I don't know. I mean, it's one of those ones that's so early, like it's either going to do really, really well or it might just fizzle out. But then if you do buy any of this gear, like that microphone, could it work on something else if this app goes away? Could you tell from reading through this?
I can't really tell. And I'm slightly confused by them. There's a main bit in here that sort of says, oh, the microphone's really great and this stereo microphone. And I'm thinking, to be honest, if you're doing dialogue, you don't really want the stereo microphone. You don't want that stereo feed anyway. So, it's interesting. I mean, it's a stereo microphone and all-in-one streaming machine that costs $199 hooks directly to your Wi-Fi, and from then on you hit the big red button one time and you're live on air. That's what it says. It's interesting, as you say, whether or not that all-in-one streaming machine is like a Rodecaster, which could then be used to record your podcast, or whether it only works with this platform. It doesn't say. That's kind of anyone's guess, but it's definitely trying to hook into that kind of audio geek audience. I'm looking at you and me, Madalyn. So, and as I say, in the early days of Spaces, it would have been great to have something I could just plug in and know that it would work and do what I wanted it to do with the platform. So yeah, it's very interesting. I'm not too sure, like, it doesn't go into an awful lot of detail about what the content is that's on there at the moment. It certainly says that, it's kind of more radio based at the moment than more music based at the moment than dialogue and conversation. But yeah, it's definitely one to watch.
And I think it's interesting that while it's free to use and listen, are they just trying to monetize through this gear, through the hardware? I just, with us being the audio geeks we are, we have enough gear. We don't want to buy any more gear. I take that back. You'd probably like to keep buying as much gear as you can, because that is part of the fun with being really into audio. But like, we have plenty. I don't really want to buy more. I'd rather just use what I have. But from reading this article, it sounds like maybe that's part of how they're monetizing it right now, since they're not taking ads. But I don't know. The more I read through this article, the more interesting it is. So I definitely encourage our listeners to bookmark this, read it later. And what really got me, Suze, was the last paragraph of this article. It says, Blast captures the best parts of radio while avoiding all of its problems. You don't get blaring ads every 5 minutes. The song selection is free from corporate interference, and the vicious political firebrands haven't arrived yet. That was like, sign me up. It's like, that's refreshing, and I would like more of that. And I would love that for music, but I love that they're also, podcasters and people using, spoken voice on there, not just music. So I think it's super interesting, but I don't know if the way they're trying to get this out there is the idea is great, but are people going to be willing to buy gear to broadcast, and knowing that's only up for 24 hours?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting model, and it will be interesting to see what happens next to it. In my head, I think perhaps they're going, they feel like they know their audience. They want people who want to create high quality audio, people who understand that, that they don't want lossy audio and broadcast quality audio going out. That's who they're trying to get to. This article also talks a little bit about how, this is about music, and they do mention that Spotify has just closed Spotify Live. And, there's that, as we've said, we've already mentioned today what a missed opportunity that was for Spotify. So if you think about someone who might have really made Spotify Live work and had some great music on there and all those kind of things, then perhaps someone would pay that amount. They're interested in audio, they're interested in their music. There's this live platform where they can, get their music out into the world. Perhaps they would pay $200 to buy the microphone and have a go and see what happened with it. So perhaps that audience is too niche, though, I would suggest at this point.
Well, thanks for sharing all that. So Ray is with us. Hey, Ray, how's it going?
Hello, everybody. I'm going to finally start launching my podcast before I finish my book. And my podcast is going to be all about being dyslexic. So I'm going to go through a range of people that are just dyslexic, because the market there is kind of small. It'll probably be once a week. I wanted to let you guys just hear your opinion about that.
Any podcast that you put your enthusiasm and passion behind, Ray, is going to be epic. So, I think it's something you know about, that you've got experience of, and I'm sure that you'll be able to support other people and find other people to talk to about it. So I think your podcast will be great. So don't forget to drop us the link when it goes live.
I'm excited for you. That's great, Ray. And what's interesting is that when you have, you made a really interesting point. So you're saying, like, you've got a specific topic of what you want to talk about with your guests. Many times people hold back because they say, well, you know what? There's already a bunch of podcasts out there like that. But let me tell you, there's not going to be one like yours, because we're all unique and we always have our own spin, our own thoughts, our own ideas that will be different than others who are doing the exact same thing. So many times people think, well, mine needs to be really niche and something nobody else is doing. And I'm actually going to be starting a new podcast, very separate from my business life. And a big reason why I am doing it is because there is a need for it, that nobody's really doing it. So I figure, well, I'm going to be the one to do it. But also on the flip side, I think too many times people just are looking for, I wasn't looking for that, but I just kept wondering, why is there not a podcast for this one thing that I would love to listen to? Well, then let me go create it. But then on that opposite end is when there are already people, and even if there was a whole bunch of people doing this new one I want to start, I would do it anyway. Because again, there's two sides of this. Fill in that need, or, well, there's already people doing it, so the need's being filled, but it's not going to be as the same because I'm bringing my uniqueness to it. So I know, Ray, whatever it is you do is going to be amazing. So good luck, and definitely keep us posted.
Yeah, it's only two. It's not a big avenue. So I'm going to hit it more on the creative side and the creative thinking. So I haven't gotten a name. I think I'm going to call it, I think I'm going to leave it Ray for now, or maybe when I launch it, it might change. But it will be catered towards people that are just dyslexic, and not to say that I'm excluding anybody. It's just that a lot of people that are dyslexic, they're very shy. They're not like me. It's very difficult for them to open up. And I want to be able to leave an avenue for them to be able to feel the courage to come on and do it.
So Tyree is next. Hey, Tyree, how are you?
I'm doing well. How you guys doing?
Doing great. Thanks for joining us.
Most definitely, man. I've been listening to you guys for a minute now. I've had a quick question as far as, the social audio space goes. Do you guys think Twitter will turn to like more of a podcast focus since everybody's on spaces nowadays, including the politicians? Or
it sure seems to be going that way. I mean, Suze and I have been on Spaces for over 2 years. We see the power of social audio. It does seem like more and more people are doing it, and Elon's embracing it. What do you think, Suze?
It's hard to tell what Twitter's roadmap is in terms of audio anymore. We certainly used to have some idea that they wanted to bring podcasting into Twitter. They tried to do that for a little while, which is what I was saying about, when it was the audio tab and we went in and we could see that AI-driven playlist being given to us. We could listen to a few episodes of selected podcasts. I'm not sure that particularly worked. It certainly didn't work as in I didn't like it. It didn't work for me. So, we know that the platform can do that kind of thing. We've also heard that Elon wants this app to be all things to all people, from, video live streaming to all kinds of stuff. So I really wouldn't be surprised if podcasts do make a reappearance. How that will happen, I'm not entirely sure. We've already got the Daily Wire who are bringing their podcasting over here. We've got Elon tweeting a couple of weeks ago about what a great idea it would be to record your podcast while you're on Spaces, which is exactly what myself and Madalyn have been doing for the last couple of years. I think maybe that message has taken a really long time to filter through to people, that's what this platform can be used for. But I certainly don't think we've got to the end of the piece of string regarding how Twitter will be using audio just yet. So I think it's very much a watch this space, and I still think pretty much anything could happen on Twitter.
Oh, yeah, okay. Because the reason why I asked that is because I've just been noticing different, the evolution of the spaces throughout the years. But it feels like it's been forever, but 2-3 years. Because I noticed people are playing what was that, karaoke nights and stuff like that, or streaming albums together. I was like, it's endless possibilities.
Yeah, for sure.
And I still don't think people are using it to its full potential in some cases. I still think there's loads more ways that it could be used that people aren't using it. So, and that's one of the reasons why me and Madalyn got so fascinated in it and started this up in the first place, so that we could talk about those spaces that we'd seen that were really interesting and were doing different things. So, yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and one that we'll all be watching.
And hopefully more people will do what Suze and I are doing, where we are doing Spaces, we are also recording this so that there's a podcast version. I mean, I always tell people Spaces is like a live podcast, but you can make it a podcast because you can just download the MP3, or in the case of Suze and I, since we're podcasters, we've been podcasters a long time, I'm recording myself locally on my computer. Suze is doing the same. We're both talking through our fancy podcast mics through Twitter, but we're each recording a very clean copy that Suze will do her podcast editing magic later. So it'll come out on Friday. And so we've got that nice clean audio, and then the Q&A, this part right now, will be the MP3 we can get through Twitter that Suze can then, put into the podcast version as well. And I wish more people would utilize that. We see a lot of Spaces, but you could take the recording. You don't have to do it like we are, where we're, trying to get these super clean copies. You can just take the MP3 of the whole thing and chop it up however you want, turn it into a podcast and put it out there. So hopefully we'll see more people start embracing that the way Suze and I have been doing it. Andrew's next. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, you two. Great show, as always. Just thought I'd
Thank
give you a little bit of insight into that Robert F. Kennedy space.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, so what happened was the actual space that over 120,000 people had RSVP'd to, that never actually got started. So what happened was Robert started the space on a different URL. Now, the reasons that could have happened were, one, they tried to start the space and there was an error and he couldn't start it, so he had to start it with a new space. Number two, he couldn't find the scheduled space when he went to start it, because we know that does happen sometimes if you're not familiar with it. You may not know that the calendar at the top right is where you find your scheduled space, and that's where you start it. There had been some talk of people having a similar issue when they couldn't start the scheduled space they had on that day, so that could well be the case. But what happened was the upcoming space stayed there for, I think it was a day and a half, 2 days. So I could see it on Space's dashboard where you could still RSVP to that space. The other one had already started and had the 500,000 users on the live, and then the cancellation happened sometime in the last 12 hours. So somebody in the team took the right decision, because it was still showing up on their timeline that you could RSVP in. It was still showing up on the Spaces dashboard. So that's what happened. We don't exactly know which one of those scenarios was the correct one yet. I'm sure it will come out in the weeds. What we're finding is David Sachs, who is the moderator, he's on the All In pod with Jason Calacanis. They kind of do a debrief on the situation, and we get to find out some insights to the setting up of the space. So hopefully next week we'll get to the absolute truth of why they started it with another URL instead of using the upcoming space that 126,000 people had RSVP to, and then wondered why they didn't get the email alert or the notification.
And that has always been one of our issues, hasn't it? Even with a much, much smaller space, is that if your space fails on setup, any of those people who've set a reminder, you've lost them instantly, which is a big deal when you've got a lot of people that are gathering in one place. But that does explain the cancelled on the card then, doesn't it, as well? So thanks.
Yeah, that only happened in the last 12 hours. So somebody in the team realised we better take that down, cancel it, so that people can't keep RSVPing, and it doesn't look like it's on the timeline when it didn't start, when we all know it absolutely did.
And I have a question for you, Andrew. Why do you think they scheduled this to coincide with the Apple event?
Absolute madness.
That's my thinking too. Okay.
There is no rhyme or reason to it. It was just a bad scheduling feature. I think what happened is, because it was kind of like I think the email exchange was between Robert and Elon, and it was almost one of those things they just threw out a time on the timeline. None of them had probably checked the calendar and thought, holy shit, that's actually on Apple's big event. And they just ran with it, when what they should have done was said, actually, looking at the calendar, we should probably postpone this and move it to either afterwards, before, or the next day. It just seemed, nobody can actually fathom why it was on at the same time.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Great insights.
Thank you,
again.
Andrew.
Thanks.
No worries.
Hey there, Brent. How are you?
I'm good, but I'm happy to always be here and find out what's happening in social audio. But I was thinking about like social audio from like a journalism perspective. That if you were a news reporter and you had an article that you were publishing, you could then open a space and talk about that article. I think about that. I think about that I'm going to do that when I start to blog.
That's a great idea. I love that.
Yeah, and certainly we did see quite a few news outlets and publishers that used to use spaces in just that way. But unfortunately, I think all of the kind of Twitter upheaval, if we just lump it into that 2-word phrase, has scared a lot of them away, has meant a lot of them have left. Various issues with Elon, and we don't see quite so many of those traditional and more established publishers spinning up spaces anymore. I used to like listening to the Tortoise Media spaces each week, but
I do believe in the power of using audio. And Brent, I love your idea. I think that's great, and it never hurts to try and just see how it goes. What's great about spaces is it's a great way to get your message out and build a community through that. And so I think that could work really well for your blog. Thank you to all of our speakers who came on and shared so much great stuff. And we're available in all of your favorite podcast apps. We're out there, All Things Audio. You can also go to allthingsaudiopodcast.com as well.
You certainly can. And you can catch us here on Twitter and use the hashtag AllThingsAudio, and we'll pick that up throughout the week. So that's it for this week. But thank you so much to everyone that's been here in the space with us and those of you listening. And we'll catch up with you next week.
Bye, everybody.